Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, for absence. Okay. For attendance, we have 3 people missing: Mr. Reed, Mr. Lido, Mr. Rooney. That's it, pretty much, right? Okay. Okay, so consent calendar, anything about the consent calendar? Nope. Okay, for communications, if we can enter items A through N as.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sure.
Madam Chair, if I could go back to the consent calendar.
Sure.
In the minutes for L&A, if we could change members present from Dee Martin to Jennifer Idelov.
Okay, you got it. You got that, Carol, right?
Good catch.
She's on L&A. So
And
change-
subsequently, all the DMs to JAs.
Okay. Okay, and then for communications, item A through N can go in as communications. Okay?
On the 14th? I would recommend that the LNA minutes be corrected at an LNA meeting,
Okay,
since it's its own subcommittee.
okay,
It's actually, those subcommittee minutes are actually not on the consent calendar. Even though I
Okay.
know they're in the packet, but I think that would be the appropriate way to amend them
okay,
at the LNA meeting.
okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
So up to public participation. Anybody wish to publicly participate? Seeing nobody, I believe we don't have any appointments for tonight.
Correct.
So going on to action items, do we have someone who can report on Town Council Committee on Finance, Education, Health, and Public Safety?
Madam Chairman, we have not met since our last meeting. We are in the midst of scheduling a meeting for us all to get together. There is some information from the Board of Finance that deals with items that we will be talking about within new business that since we haven't discussed as a committee, I'll do as part of the discussion of those items in new business rather than as a report, because it has not been reported to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. Anybody else? All right, going on to B, Town Council Committee on Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Park and Rec. So that is me. For public hearings, there were 3 main hearings, and the first one was for Axle Plastics, and it's being tabled to June 7th. The applicant did not attend the public hearing. They want a permit approval modification proposing chemical exterior storage, 3 exterior overflow tanks, chain link fence, reconfiguration of parking. And then the second one is 485 Pepper Street, which is Industrial District 1, and that also has been continued to 6/7/18, June 7th. Special exception permit application proposing a change of use to allow the storage of building materials and construction equipment. And the applicant requested a sunset provision. So Commission requested the town attorney opinion on issues related to sunset provision and this application, which I assume will be coming out later. Industrial District 3, proposed text amendment to amend section 4.3.8, accessory use to permit storage silos in the Industrial District 3 zone not to exceed a height of 65 feet, nor 20% of the gross square footage of the principal building. The public hearing has been closed. Notes for revised text amendment increase to 65 feet for storage silos set for approval, 10% instead of 20% for gross square footage of the principal building. And I believe this was also on the Courier the other day. And the maximum building height raised to 55 feet. And then for Park and Rec, there was a bunch of different things. D. Keene had a concept for a food truck festival as a fundraising event for the new playground. The playground committee would like to hold the event at Wolf Park in early summer, depending on approval from the Park and Rec Commission. Mr. King proposed a maximum of 12 food trucks positioned along 2 sides of the main parking lot. and they would sell tickets and plates and 25-foot stalls per truck. Discussion of possible dates. Park schedule will have to be checked to ensure picnic reservations and planned activities are not impacted. He also requested commission feedback regarding if this was a viable fundraising option, and if so, would pursue accordingly. The proposed time would be 10:30 or 11 to 3 p.m. And so that's made basically about the food trucks. And then they reviewed the current budget. They're going to continue to get quotes to obtain better pricing. Contra balance is approximately $300,000. There should be a plan to spend this money on program-based items. And then the septic system at Great Hollow Lake failed approximately 2 weeks ago. Porta potties were brought in. The work will take 3 to 5 days. They wanted to fix it before Memorial Day weekend. Did they happen to do that?
The workers were still on site over the weekend, so I did not get a chance to get an update this morning to see if they were able to sign off and open them.
Gotcha. And then for rec department reports, 2 weeks of programs at Massac Pool were lost due to maintenance issues. Most successful family fun night in Massac Pool ran in April with 34 participants. And Wolf Park is busy with fields and picnic usage. Recent change in purchasing policy caused delays with acquisition of certain supplies. It delayed lining the fields, resulted from not having paint supplies on hand. And then Mr. Casey, who's a special ed teacher at Stepney Elementary, requested permission to participate in the character dinners as in previous years. He plans to create balloon animals and have a canister out for voluntary donations for the Shriners Children's Hospitals. Victorinox Swiss Army reached out via email expressing interest in getting more involved with park improvements. So Tony Scott and, is it Missy Oros, will meet with Swiss Army to discuss it. And for construction updates, additional services were billed for reproduction and shipping of final IWC and PZC approval sets for town filing. And the storage shed has been, I believe, approved. Tony Scott discussed location of a 12 by 15 storage shed with R. Henderson, who came to one of our last meetings for American Youth Football. Proposed location is behind scoreboard. This is acceptable to AYF, and visibility from road is limited. Discuss possibility of other sport groups requesting storage sheds. Storage shed for AYF is justified due to safety concerns for children, and that he also, when he came last time, mentioned. Kids Creation Playground Committee would like to build a new playground next spring. They hope to raise $300,000 for the project. Kerma inspected the current playground and determined it met all playground standard guidelines. Wine permit for picnics. Due to liability concerns, First Selectman Kenneth Kellogg and Town Attorney Jeremy Hayden developed alcohol beverage release, indemnification, and waiver agreement for picnic groups requesting beer, wine. The waiver will be reviewed for approval at Town Council meeting, which was last time, and I believe we approved it. Motion to approve the alcohol beverage release, indemnification, and waiver agreement as stated pending approval by town, and the Town Council passed it 7-0. And they had a big discussion about guidance from the Commission on the policy of employees receiving seasonal passes and stickers. Past practice involved all full-time and part-time employees receiving a form to select one pass. They can have a lake or boat ramp, they can have an adult or child, they can additionally have one vehicle parking sticker, which would be issued to each full-time and part-time employee. As the Commission does not see a difference in policy for employees and volunteers, the next section dealt with volunteers. Past practice involved volunteers EMS, volunteer fire companies receiving one lake or boat ramp pass, 2 Massac Pool cards, or 2 Wolf Park individual memberships. So Tony Scott, who's the chair, made a motion to approve allowance to full-time and part-time Town of Monroe employees and volunteer EMS and fire company volunteer staff of one of the following: a lake or boat ramp pass, adult male membership, adult female membership, child age 3 to 9 membership, or child age 10 to 17 membership, plus plus one vehicle parking sticker. And basically that is it for my report. So going on to C, we're up to Town Council Committee on Legislative and Administrative Matters. L&A, was anything done?
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, we had a meeting tonight and we discussed issues that are in new business this evening, the S&P Global Ratings, independent bond and investment consultants, and the Wells Fargo custody agreements, and those were all approved to bring to town council,
Okay, and I know they're on our agenda.
and they're on our agenda.
Okay, thank you. D, Strategic Planning Committee.
We met twice, one discussing the fire analysis, space analysis study, and we are proceeding with Humes, and that is going along well at this point. We met again today, actually, in the subgroup, just to go through the fire station at Station 1 to talk about some of the things that they have that are not in code currently. In addition, we met for, with the, it's a separate issue, the strategic planning met with the strategic planning meeting, met with DiCarlo and Dahl for checking, for approval for them to proceed, and we're looking at their references.
Okay, thank you. EMS Building Committee.
If I may,
Sure.
just, since Mr. Rooney is not here this evening, they are meeting tomorrow night, I believe. It's tomorrow night. I can't remember. Tuesday. I keep thinking it's Monday night.
Yeah.
They're meeting tomorrow night, and they will be reviewing questions that were received during the RFP process so that they can provide answers to those questions.
Okay, thank you. Fire Services Study Committee.
They're proceeding. I talked to Pat O'Hara today. They are waiting some feedback, and I talked to the chiefs. They're supposed to be coming back and meeting with the chiefs next week.
Okay, and lastly, First Selectmen's update.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Quickly, I don't have to tell everyone that we've gone through another round of bad weather with a lot of power outages. I just to keep it short and sweet, want to once again thank everyone on our team and in the town for once again rising the challenge and keeping everyone safe, and for everyone's patience as we dealt with another round. And as painful and as frustrating as it was, we were fortunate compared to some of our neighbors not too far away. So I just want to thank everyone for that, for their patience and for their help. I wanted to make sure everyone knows that the state budget was passed for fiscal year 19 it signed into law on May 15th. And the good news is that our state aid line item is in line with the original legislative budget. So based upon our conservative approach, we are on a really solid foundation as we approach fiscal year 19. There was a question at the last meeting in regards to Pepper Street. I did speak to the business owner, and they did have a work stoppage over the winter, but construction had resumed. They are hopefully back on track, and they're hoping to be finishing by early fall of this year. And just as just more as a footnote from last meeting's update, the roundabout, the state has told us that they will be open for traffic on June 4th. That is what we are being told. Obviously, work will continue because there's more improvements that need to be made there, but the roundabout itself will be operational for traffic on June 4th. So, and that is all I have. So.
I hope there'll be some like police directing us.
I don't anticipate that, but there will be significant, I'm told they will be bringing a significant number of barrels and other traffic control devices and things to really try and raise awareness. You've got the variable message signs have been put up, so they are going to be putting a lot of things up there to let people know that there's a new traffic pattern there. But people are going to, I mean, that's my big message is, slow down and pay attention, because it's going to be different.
I'm not going to go for at least a year on that road.
I do have a comment to your report, if I can, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
I was at Board of Ed the other night, and Jack, please, can speak up if you will, but they were raving about how you handled Eversource, and it obviously stopped us from having to delay school another day, or going into the master plan that they had to move kids all over the place. So kudos were rendered from the Board of Ed. Good job. I mean, we've been hit with a lot. So
Stephanie would not have opened if it wasn't for Ken.
nice
We
job.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack, for saying that. I appreciate it. It is very much a team effort, and we're all in this together, and it's my job to keep the pressure on, and we gotta get our town up and running. So,
Very nice. Okay, unfinished business, Chalk Hill updates.
no update.
Okay, So going on to new business. The first thing is a WMNR fiscal year 2019 budget proposal. I will introduce the following resolution and move for its adoption. Resolved that WMNR's FY 2019 budget is hereby approved as proposed. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Condon. Discussion?
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, so I would like to turn this over to Mr. Kurt Anderson, who you know from WMNR. He proposed his budget to the Board of Finance at their last meeting, which the Board of Finance did approve. It now comes before you for final approval. As he will explain, MNR is it is operate under the town, but it is a self-funded program, so it operates outside of the operating budget, so that's why we don't deal with this during budget time. So with that, Kurt?
Yes, first it was approved at the WMNR Commission meeting and then the Board of Finance, and now we're here. It's what they call a special revenue fund, and literally, of course, the money is all in the town accounts, but the surplus that we have is earmarked for us, and when we need to use it, because our income comes and goes throughout the year, but the expenses are fairly constant, we don't touch a dime of the town's money for our cash flow, as it were. We just use the money that's been donated and raised by the station. Let's see, I'm here to answer any questions, if anybody has any.
There was speculation in regards to the money that was going to be received because it changes every year, or it wasn't guaranteed. Did that come through?
Let's see, we're talking about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is best described as a private corporation funded by the American people. They get about $400 million a year, most of which goes to public TV, and public radio gets a little. Yes, actually, there were, if I remember correctly, 66, a year and a half ago, a year and 2 months ago, there were 66 government programs or agencies: National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities, Corporation for Public Broadcasting were 3 of them. And President Trump had recommended that they be almost zeroed out, except the way it starts with Congress, then it goes to the Senate, and then it goes to the President. So they got their full funding, and we got the funding that we had gotten in the past.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
all in favor of this resolution? Okay, let me count heads. It passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Okay, going on to B, resolution regarding the fiscal year 2018-19 budget transfer for Information Technology Department. I will introduce the following resolution and move for its adoption. Transfer of funds to amend the fiscal year 2018-19 Information Technology budget. Be it resolved that the following budget transfer be approved pursuant to Chapter 8, Section 7F of the Charter for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019. Data processing from $156,250 to $27,750. So that's for the contracted services part of the $156,000. AV, $2,000. The toner, $12,000. Repair, $16,800. Munis, $56,700. WAN, $41,000. Do I hear a second? Second by Mr. Condon. Discussion?
Madam Chairman, if I may?
Sure, of course.
So, Paul Corse, who I will let elaborate in a moment, had approached me to request that his line, after the budget process, he had a feeling that he wanted to take that data processing line, which really was a bunch of other things that were kind of commingled together, and he would like to have some greater visibility and granularity over that so he can just manage that better. So it certainly was in line with being more transparent and more accountable for certain items, so certainly has my support. We did present this to the Board of Finance when they approved it. It is a net zero transfer, so where this has no budgetary impact, is strictly a management tool. So with that, Paul, if you'd like to add anything further and what specifically you're trying to get under control here.
Basically, the IT or tech data processing line was basically a big bucket that just caught everything. So there were fixed and dynamic costs in there, so it was very difficult to keep track of things. The new line items that I've proposed split that up between fixed costs such as the WAN, the wide area network, that's a static cost, and things like toner or repairs, which can fluctuate from year to year.
Okay, any other questions of Mr. Corson? Mr. Mauer first and then Mrs. Aguilar.
Not so much a question as I said, there were many items that were discussed in Board of Finance that I would report individually. This was one of those items. Board of Finance did discuss this and found not only, as was mentioned, that it's a zero line item transfer, it's also much in line with what we were doing throughout our budget process earlier this year in spreading things out into separate categories to give more clarity and just a more open view of the budget to the public as well as clarity to the council and to the boards as well. The Board of Finance found that this met the goals of what our budget season was as well as the direction the town is heading and should be heading, and that was part of their approval process that I bring to council today.
Thank you. Mrs. Aguilar?
Will this be itemized in going forward in the budget? This will
Yes.
now won't be a bucket item
Correct.
anymore?
Correct.
So
Thank
this will
you.
be all
Yeah,
separated out?
from this point forward, these new lines will appear.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All in favor of this resolution? Passes 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one, I'm going to do in 5 different resolutions. So, resolution to transfer funds from the general fund surplus to the capital reserve fund for various special appropriations for fiscal year 2018. I'll introduce the following resolution and move for its adoption. Be it resolved that the following transfer from the FY 2018 general fund surplus to the capital reserve fund be approved for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. From 149,272 to 149,272. It's a general fund transfer out, capital reserve fund, committed fund balance for the Board of Ed Chromebook replacement project. So, do we hear a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Aguilar. Discussion?
So, Madam Chairwoman, as you will all recall from the budget process, there were a few items that were originally part of the operating budget or I should say the operating budget proposals for fiscal year 19. And we identified opportunities that we knew would present themselves to use current year surplus to fund some of those one-time projects that really could be taken out of the operating budget and help to contribute to a lower tax burden for fiscal year 19. So the first few of these things that we're going to discuss tonight fall into that category. The first one is this Chromebook replacement project. And I would turn it over to Dr. Zamri to discuss it further. But this was something that was put out to bid, and they obviously got the best proposal. Came in at $149,272.
Mr. Zimmerman, Dr. Zimmerman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kellogg. The main thing I want to mention is that this purchase is a really good example of the collaboration going on between the town and the Board of Ed. As Mr. Kellogg noted, this was taken off the increase for the BOE, put into this purchase plan so that we could lower the total increase in the BOE budget. We also, in terms of collaboration, used the town purchasing policy when we went out for this. Even though this is under the BOE, we thought it would be good that we're doing this in line with the purchasing policy just set up by the town. And we found it to be very worthwhile. The way that the bids came in was, quite honestly, exactly the way that we had hoped. We have a vendor who we trust, who we know is a very, very good vendor, and the price, $160 per Chromebook, is really pretty amazing when you think about it, because the devices actually work, and $186 each.
So where do the books go? Each student gets one, or?
We've been purchasing Chromebooks for about 6 years. We haven't really replaced any. So the earliest ones are reaching a point where they're going to stop working. Now, Google has, in the last 4 years or so, set a date that they're referring to as a auto update end of life, similar to what Windows has been doing. Windows, you'll have a Windows 7 machine and they tell you August of, I think it's August of, it's coming to, is that when it is? They'll set a date when it will no longer be supported. Well, some hardware will continue to run. If it's got enough there, it will run the next operating system. With the Chromebooks, they have a finite life also. So many of the earliest ones that we're running are going to come to end of life, according to Google, next year at some point. So we need to replace those before they become machines that really aren't stable anymore. We're hoping that we'll still get some life out of them, but there's unknowns there, especially with things like testing. If they don't run the update for the current software, they're no longer secure, and then we have issues in being able to use them for meeting the needs of students. So it's primarily to replace.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Mrs. Aguirre?
thank you, Chair. Are you going to, in the future, this is a similar question, is it going to be a line item in the budget, like rotating Chromebooks?
Well, it's
so that
interesting.
Not a
Yeah,
transfer?
one of the things we've talked with Board of Finance about at the last meeting on this topic is on the town side and in the BOE side, what we'd really like to work towards is a refresh line item. Now, on the town side, there is a line there called the tech plan. Unfortunately, the last few years, we've defunded that plan. And if you're around when JP was chair a number of years ago, we had a conversation back then when the XP machines were going end of life. We had to buy all new machines for the town in one shot because we didn't fund an ongoing plan. Problem speaking for both of us, but you correct me if I'm off here. One of the things we'd really like to see moving forward is some funding on both sides where we're not coming to you with a big amount like this, but every year it's a smaller amount that's ongoing, so we're continuing to purchase a rotation. We have databases on both sides that show the age of our machines, so it's all planned out, but we need the funding to go behind it to purchase a portion every single year and make that expenditure more predictable for Town Council and Board of Finance and not as up and down.
We just did,
Do you think, and this would be to you also, do you think that the town has adequate town versus schools? I mean, do we put enough money into town technology like we do schools? And would that improve town?
Well, and case in
Anything?
point, I got, for that IT refresh, I had 30,000 every year. And we were actually taking that money, reinvesting it into new computers, some infrastructure, and at one time, even some Wi-Fi upgrades. So at one time, it was funded, and it was good, and then it got cut.
so we've discussed not just funding in the operating budget towards a capital reserve line, but also some of the capital projects, not in fiscal year 19, but fiscal year 20. For example, like the Microsoft Office refresh for Town Hall, and so there are things that are definitely on the radar for the town side that need to be evaluated. I mean, this year, the big thing that we wanted to address was the police email server, so that's what we're tackling this year, because that's a must-do at this point, and because of the level of encryption required and the security issues, that has to kind of be done as a one-off anyway, so.
Correct.
So, but,
Great,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Merrill?
Am I correct in my understanding that this was part of the Board of Education 2019, and now, or needs, that was taken out and to be paid for by reserves on the town side from the 2018 budget?
nah, I wouldn't characterize it that way. It was a need that was identified by IT that we were going to have to budget somewhere in the operating budget for fiscal year 19. But as we went through all this, it would have been in the capital budget basically, and which we kind of carry on the town side no matter what. So rather than putting it next year for bonding or some other funding source for capital, we're like, we can do this in the current year with the surplus we're going to have this year. So it was a way to combination of get things out of the operating budget and also lower our issues with bonding costs and things like that.
If we are to continue to create a reserve fund as being discussed, that wouldn't be part of the capital budget, and
Correct.
what part of the budget would we be talking about putting that on? Would that be a combination of both town and Board of Ed, or would town carry the burden on it?
We haven't gotten that level of specificity, but you raise a valid point that we'll have to evaluate. But it would need at some point to be an appropriation into a designated capital line, similar to what we do for like EMS vehicles, let's say, that kind of thing. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I just real briefly, Mr. Fogg, so you don't anticipate that that kind of purchase would go back into the Board of Ed budget at any point? Would it stay on the town side?
yeah, I think if we're going to fund it out of operating and put a capital reserve, I think it would make sense to me that it'd be on the Board of Ed side, but, we haven't had those specific conversations yet.
Yet to be
I
determined.
certainly would want input from our finance department and our Board of Finance, but that's the way I would envision it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Otherwise, all in favor of this resolution? It passes 6-0.
Thank you.
So I'm going on to B, $131,880 for the Board of Education laptop replacement project. Be it resolved that the following transfer from the FY 2018 general fund surplus to the capital fund reserve fund be approved for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. We're taking general fund transfer out $131,880 and moving it over to the BOE laptop replacement project, which is $131,880. We hear a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Mauer. Discussion?
So similar to the last project, this is another project that, exact same scenario, was also put out to bid. Dr. Zamory can speak to the specifics on this project. I just want to elaborate earlier on my other comment. We have to also recall that, I think the intent of this, one of the things we have to evaluate is whether we're gonna, we want one technology reserve, kind of capital reserve line, or two, and that's part of the challenge of, Board of Ed, because some of the stuff is clearly Board of Ed, some is town, but there are some things that we do share, like munis, for example. So those kind of things, if we look at putting away money, that's where it gets a little bit, we need to have some further detailed conversations. But anyway, these are laptop replacement program for the teachers. So
a little background on these. Initially, we had put in for the Massac High School teacher laptops to be replaced not this coming summer, last summer. It was postponed by a year, so we went out to bid for this. These machines are laptops, and they're also docking stations. One of the things that we have to do at Massac High School is the teachers do move from room to room, so there has to be a dock there that connects the teacher to all the peripherals in one connector. So the unfortunate fact about those docking stations is they aren't cheap. They're $300 each. That's included in the price of each device. We've tried every way we can. We continue to try to find other ways around this. The manufacturers make these proprietary, and they lock you in. No matter what manufacturer you go with, they have their own set of connectors. So that is part of what's included in the price for each device, but it really is a necessary piece when you have teachers traveling room to room. At Massac, it's instructional time. So if a teacher can come in, plug in right away, it's important that the smart board comes up, they're on the network, they have printer access, all those things in one shot. The other thing to know about these machines is they do have touch screens on them. The upcharge is about $100 per machine, but the reason why we did that is one of the other things that we're facing is our smart boards have a limited life. And we don't have money in the budget really to replace all those boards. But one of the things that's changing in technology is the nature of the way technology is used in the classroom. If you go back 5 and 6 years, it was everybody coming to the smart board to touch it and manipulate things. It's changed. The device I use every day is a $200 Chromebook with the touch screen on it. We didn't buy those with the student devices this time out because we didn't feel it was cost effective, so we went with $186 devices that don't have touch. But where it's going over time, touch or not, is there are means now to be able to display off a student device or a teacher device onto the smart board, so you don't have to go up there. But providing the teacher with touch at their device then allows them to do a lot of those touch kinds of things on the device, and then it's mirrored up onto the board. So the intent of spending the additional $100 per device is, as the smart boards go, we have something else to be able to fall back on by having the teacher device with the touch on it.
And my recollection is that actually was much more cost-effective than replacing the boards, much more cost-effective.
The physical board, just the board, is about $900 to $1,000. So at $100 per, it's a good differential.
Any questions? All in favor of this resolution? Okay, passes 6-0. Going on to C, $130,000.
Thank you.
Yep, $130,000 for the MS-4 general permit compliance. Be it resolved that the following transfer from the FY 2018 general fund surplus to the capital fund reserve be approved for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. General fund transfer out from $130,000 to the committed fund balance for MS-4, general permit $3,000. To transfer this money out, be it resolved that this would go from one to the other, just like the other ones. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, so Dennis Condon, discussion?
So again, this was a budget, this was an item that was going to be in the operating budget as an appropriation. We did keep, as you'll recall, I believe it was $20,000, is that correct, Ron, in the operating budget, but we need to fully fund this for the life of the 5-year permit process. We need an additional $130,000, and that we specifically had talked about taking out of there and using current year surplus to allocate those funds. This is, as you know, is an unfunded mandate from the state of Connecticut for a variety of activities required for their permit process. There are consultants that we've already engaged through a process that started about a year ago. That I know Mr. Schatzlein's come in and spoken to council about in the past in terms of what's involved. So there's consulting, there's GIS work, there is storm, catch basin cleaning. There's a variety of activities that all need to be done to be compliant with the permit. And so the intent of this is to put that money aside so that we don't have to, so that it's addressed and can be allocated as those costs occur, so that if something were to change down the road in terms of the state law that requires this, we would not, we could adjust our commitment accordingly.
Discussion, Mr. Mallon?
Again, similar to my comments before on Board of Finance, all of these items did go through Board of Finance. Board of Finance discussed them in depth and approved them as necessary items for the town, as well as within the parameters that the Board of Finance felt comfortable with for the town budget.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution? Passes 6-0. Going on to D, $75,000 for emergency repairs. Be it resolved that the following transfer from the FY 2018 general fund surplus to the capital reserve fund be approved for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. Transferring out $75,000, putting it into the committed fund balance for emergency repairs, $75,000. Yes, in the, wait a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Mauer. Any discussion?
So, Madam Chairman, one of the things that we recognized, although we've certainly addressed in our purchasing policy the need for to act expeditiously when we have emergency repair situations that need to be addressed. So our purchasing policy does cover it. One thing that we don't have currently is a readily available funding source to procure things when we need to address those emergency repairs. And the example that I can give you is one thing you referenced earlier in in one of your committee reports. The septic pumps failed at Wolf Park and on the lakeside. When we got in there, not only did the pumps fail, after putting cameras down there, we found issues with pipes and tanks, and it became a very involved project. We got a bunch of quotes. At the end of the day, it's about a $20,000 repair between parts and labor, with a couple of different vendors doing that, and there'll be probably some additional costs for asphalt and concrete after the fact. So we need to have a way to access funds expeditiously when those types of things come up. So the request would be to allocate the $75,000, which we would utilize for those repairs at those septic repairs at the park, but then also have some residual funds available should something like this occur in the future as well. And there's certainly a commitment back to the Board of Finance to, as we would with any fund, as they would get their regular reports on activity and committed funds, they would certainly see anything that was expended out of here going forward.
Any comments, Mr. Merrill?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As Selectman Kellogg referenced, this was talked about in Board of Finance. In fact, this was discussed in great detail. Board of Finance went back and forth as to whether to allow even higher funds, as these are simply a reserve fund that is utilized solely for the purpose of an emergency nature, and anything after the fact would still need to be approved and discussed in both Board of Finance and or Town Council as appropriate. It just allows for, if there are any items such as the septic at Great Hollow Lake, where you could talk about either loss of revenue as well as loss of enjoyment of parks and recreation areas, as well as other areas of the town and buildings of the town, if things weren't taken care of immediately, instead of waiting for either a Board of Finance and or Town Council meeting to be able to approve the funds. Board of Finance came to the conclusion that the $75,000 is a good start, and we can see if it needs to go up or down from there through the years and as it goes, but this at least gives a little bit of a cushion for this year. And the selectmen agreed that this seems to be a reasonable number to go through the fiscal year, as well as readdress come the next budget season as an actual fund to be put into the next budget.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thanks,
Mrs.
Madam
Aguirre?
Chair. Mr. Kellogg, do you think that this will be a line item in the next budget? Will we have, a safety? My concern is taking money out of the general fund now, after the budget has passed. We're not really, at budget time, we're not really giving the voters a true, if we don't have, say, $100,000 for these kind of issues, that gives more of a picture of what we'll actually be spending versus keep taking money out of the general fund for things that come up. Would that be something we could add as a line item?
I think the appropriate approach would be during budget season to see where the committed fund balance sits, and that if we do need to add to it during budget season, in other words, to get it to a level that we think is the appropriate par level for that fund, then we should address it during budget season. However, at this point, one of the challenges that occurs is where it's unknown, right? So we don't want to, we certainly don't want to overtax on a what if, right? So we want to try to get that right balance of having the right amount in there, but not, just having that's why we kind of struggled with, well, what's the right number to be in here? The other thing that comes up is that, there's certain things that if they had occurred at the beginning of the year, the fiscal year, there would have been, sufficient dollars in the repair and maintenance line item for a certain department. This was something certainly not anticipated because we're towards the end of the year. We're running into these types of challenges. So it may or may not always be an issue. Sometimes these things come up and can fit within the operating budget because there's a certain amount of repair and maintenance that is budgeted. But there are sometimes things come that are above and beyond what were planned, or just simply we're at the end of the year and there's, we don't have it available. And then I think the thing that I also want to make sure that we have on our radar is God forbid, during the storms that occurred earlier in this month, if there was something that really had to be addressed urgently, that was, suddenly we need to spend $10,000 for something that's critical. Obviously, we're gonna do what we need to do to keep our residents safe, but it would be nice to have that for those types of purposes as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just a quick question, was there no money left in Wolf Park repair and
The
maintenance?
repair maintenance, it was not, it was, I don't know the exact number around to help me. I know it was not gonna be enough. We were trying to figure out ways to cobble things together to be able to cover it, but this would have a separate, this is the way we should be approaching something like this.
Mr. Merrill?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I also would like to point out that chances are, even if without this fund, creating this fund, it would be coming out of the general fund anyways, for repairs such as this, especially so late in the season, as they would just be done individually. This simply allows there to be a reserve fund that then goes, basically is, if it's not used, it's gonna go back. It's a fund it's just putting the money that's there, allocating it aside for a specific purpose, and then if it's not utilized, returns back to the fund.
Just expedites the process.
Correct.
Okay, so can we vote on this resolution? All in favor of this resolution? Passes 6-0. Last resolution, 125 for this topic, 125,000 to assigned fund balance. Be it resolved that the following transfer from the FY 2018 general fund surplus to the capital reserve fund be approved for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. Transferring out 125,000 and putting it in the capital reserve fund, assigned fund balance, 125,000. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mara. Discussion?
So this is something that is done routinely at the end of the year. So as you know, we have an assigned fund balance in our capital reserve fund to be able to tap into so that things that are approved during the budget process, capital items where the funding source is the capital reserve account, as you'll recall from the budget process, as we go through the fiscal year, we tap into that for some of those smaller items as they come through, and so that account does get spent down, and we are simply looking to add back to it so that we will have funding for those smaller capital reserve items that are in our capital plan for next year.
Any other question, Mr. Mara?
Again, this item was discussed with the Board of Finance. Board of Finance found it to be well within the parameters of what they expected for our budget and our risks, so Board of Finance approved it unanimously.
Okay.
And actually, if I may, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Mauer mentioned something that reminded me that, even after all these transfers, we expect a very healthy, surplus of about, over $1.5 million. So we are, even with these transfers, we are a very comfortable position as relates to the general fund.
Good, great. Okay, all in favor of this resolution? It passes 6-0. Going on to S&P Global Ratings Engagement Agreement Letter. I'll introduce the following resolution and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, first selectman of the town of Monroe, is authorized to electronically confirm or otherwise execute and deliver on behalf of the town of Monroe the S&P Global Ratings Engagement Agreement dated May 11, 2018, to provide public credit rating services in connection with 2 town bond issues. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Condon. Discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So we utilize a consultant independent bond and investment consultants, LLC. We've been utilizing them, for several years. And for the current bond issues that are before us, before the town, they had approached, through our finance director, the town, and recommended that we consider for this upcoming bond issue migrating away from Moody's and utilizing S&P as our rating agency, our rating services, So they did provide us with an opinion in that regard and outlined several reasons in regards to how they strongly feel that Moody's algorithm as relates to financial management in a municipality. S&P is views it much more favorably than Moody's. Moody's also tends to have a more negative outlook in general on any Connecticut municipality, just by virtue of them being a Connecticut municipality currently. So there was a strong recommendation that we went through with them, Mr. Banowski and I, and also Board of Finance Chairman Manjos also participated in that, and we, after going through their analysis, agreed to bring it before the Board of Finance and the Town Council. The analysis that they have done in terms of S&P's rating methodology, they feel strongly that we would certainly maintain, if not improve our credit rating as relates to these bond issues. They've also recognized that several communities, we would not be alone, several communities have been switching over to S&P. Just a few of them recently, North Branford, Clinton, Guilford, South Windsor, Windsor, and Branford, all have switched recently and also obtained higher ratings. So based upon that recommendation and the discussion we had, we did bring it to Board of Finance. They were in agreement. So we would like to proceed with that. Relative to that, there is an engagement letter for any credit rating agency. The costs of that are covered as part of the bond issue. It is a standardized agreement. Our town attorneys reviewed it and had no issues with it. So we would like to proceed accordingly.
Okay, any comments, Mr. Merrill?
This was discussed at great length at Board of Finance. Both Chairman Manjos as well as Mr. Ostachevsky discussed at length about their desire to make this switch, not just their approval of it, but that they felt this was a long overdue switch over to S&P, considering the directions that the two main agencies were going, being S&P and Moody's. They felt that switching to S&P was not only safe for maintaining, but also garnered a high chance of increasing our credit rating, and was the right move for the town for many financial reasons, not just the credit rating, but also for simply the trends in the finance world right now, that S&P seems to be the way to go.
Any other comments? All in favor of this?
B.
Go ahead.
I just have a question, and the question comes from my admitted ignorance about ignorance. Moody's, Standards and Poor's, wouldn't, from the outside, it would seem to me that organizations like that would have the same criteria for establishing bond ratings. If there's like rules for doing it.
One would think it is not the case. They have different weighting. They have different. Now, I mean, the concepts, the things that they look at, I would say are probably very similar, if not the same. But their approach and their weighting of certain things might vary. So I think, you know, again, you know, if Mr. Banowski wants to elaborate further, feel free. But it has to do with the alignment of how a municipality works and how S&P views a municipal financial management versus, you know, some like a private corporation, which seems to be more the Moody's methodology, if you will.
And would it be fair to say then that S&P tends to do more municipality on the issues than Moody's?
I think a lot of Connecticut municipalities are migrating over to S&P. I don't know if, you know, which one does more. But the methodology that S&P uses is more weight. They give a higher weighting to the management of the town. And that's where we would receive high marks there, which we weren't, Moody's was not giving us adequate credit for that. So there's a lot more flexibility in the rating methodology with S&P than it is with Moody's. So that's basically what
Mr.
How
Merrill?
long have we been with Moody's?
Long time,
long time.
Long as
As long as I can remember.
long as I can remember.
No, that's a long time.
And certainly,
Must be
Moody's
4
would,
decades.
Moody's would continue to rate the bonds that are still out there issued, under their watch. But, we'd be moving forward with
So
S&P.
any new bonding?
Yes, on the new
Okay.
bond, correct.
Mr. Merrill?
One item that was also discussed through Board of Finance was that in the past, Moody's had given criteria to the town for the ability to move up in its credit rating. The town accomplished those items and those goals, and Moody's basically said, okay, well, we're keeping you the same. That is part of the, my understanding was that was weighed into part of the desire to switch over and try somebody else who might be more open to giving us more open feedback as to what we would need to do to increase our credit rating.
Feels like a bond
Okay,
shop.
anything else?
Yeah, the two overall factors that IBIC referenced in their recommendation was that S&P's rating methodology is more favorable because of a quantitative approach to their measurement of financial management, as Ron referred to, and a more guarded approach to the state's financial and economic condition and the impact on local governments. Again, in line with what we were speaking to earlier.
Okay, all
Can
in
I just,
favor?
no?
Yes.
I think I have this set in my head, but the first line in the resolution, or not in the resolution, but in the text before it says, in conjunction with our upcoming bond issue. As I read that, it was like, oh my God, what bond issue? I'm assuming that's to read in connection with the upcoming bond issuance.
Issuance, right.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
issuance, yes.
Right.
Yes, not, yeah. Yes,
It's like, whoa, there's a bond issue, okay.
yeah, no, the issuance of, yeah, it's an issuing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the
I think it
bonds
should be
that
on the
are,
Board of Finance.
as we issue bonds, there's,
All right,
we have two,
just
two
checking.
items.
Okay, now are you ready to vote on this? Do you have a comment
He's
first?
voting.
I'm ready to
He's
vote.
ready to vote. All in favor?
He's ready to go home.
Passes 6-0. Okay, going on to Independent Bond and Investment Consultants, LLC, better known as IBIC agreement. Resolution regarding IBIC professional services agreement and disclosures. I'm going to introduce the resolution and vote for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, First Selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the agreement by and between Independent Bond Investment Consultants, LLC, for municipal advisory services in regards to the town's proposed 8.085 million general obligation bonds issue of 2018, Series A, and $7.6 million general obligation refunding bonds issue of 2018, Series B, for the purpose of financing the various capital projects and refinancing the town's 2010 series bonds. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Condon. Discussion?
So we've been utilizing IBIC for several years. This is a standard agreement that is part of that issuance of the bonds, and as such, the costs are included in the bond issue. However, again, our town attorney did review this, had no concerns with it, but given that this is an agreement that we would be entering on behalf of the town, I thought it appropriate to bring it before you. Again, this was, I already said it was reviewed by our town attorney, and he had no concerns with it.
Okay, any other comments? All in favor of this resolution? It passes 6-0. Wells Fargo Custody Agreement and Account Agreement, OPEB Trust. I will introduce the resolution and vote for its adoption. Resolutions regarding the Wells Fargo Custody and Account Agreements, OPEB Trust. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, first selectman of the town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the town of Monroe the custody agreement and account agreement by and between Wells Fargo for the OPEB Trust. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Condon. Discussion?
So the OPEB Board of Trustees, which was established by a resolution of this, of the council some time ago, has under that trust agreement the authority to appoint the custodian of the trust assets. This was something that was done at an April meeting of the OPEB Board of Trustees, and they've appointed Wells Fargo. But given that there is a contractual agreement with that, it's appropriate that the council review and approve that. This was put forward to our town attorney. There were a couple of issues that concerns he had relative to limits of liability on Wells Fargo's part that he did negotiate some concessions on to his satisfaction. Other than that, it is recommended for approval.
Okay, any other comments, discussion? Mrs. Martin?
Is there some way that, am I missing Attorney Hayden's
Is it not?
corrections?
It
No.
is.
Are they? Right, but they don't show up. It's hard for me to know
I'm sorry?
what changed in, any additions or corrections. Could Attorney Hayden briefly go through those for me?
Oh, we can discuss it, yeah, I would not present, I present to you a fully negotiated agreement, I mean, if we showed you all the red lines, you'd, there's quite a bit that Attorney Hayden negotiates on behalf, but yeah, he can speak to the two areas that were updated.
Right, please.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, of the Council. There were, in this instance, there were two sections that I took issue with, 4.5 and Section 5. Bear with me as I get it up here.
It's 4.4 and 4.5.
4.4 and 4.5, thank you. You'll see in 4.4, there is a limitation. Initially, the language read, basically, under the sun, there was a limitation of liability for any indirect special damages that arose out of any services that they provided to the town. We needed that limited. That was limited to punitives and consequentials. Everything else was stricken. And with regard to Section 5, the indemnification provision, that included originally, if you look closer to the bottom, where it says negligence, that originally included gross negligence. And striking that one word was substantial from a legal standpoint, so they agreed to strike that.
All right, thank you.
Those are the big ones.
Those are the biggies, huh? Okay.
Okay,
A
anything
couple more
else?
questions.
Sure.
Hang on, Sean, I'm almost done. Under fees, page 305, number 6, fees, the custodian shall be paid reasonable compensation and fees for a service. Is there any way to, I mean, what's reasonable?
I believe,
What the going rate is?
schedule of that.
There was a fee schedule.
There is a fee schedule, it's attached.
It is?
Yes, it is an attachment. Unfortunately, they're all, the pages are not, it's a page 1 of 2, but it's towards the back.
Here's it's a third page of the packet, I think.
Institutional retirement trusts and custody.
Yes.
That's good. One more quick question.
Read these things so carefully.
Authorized, you're supposed to read it.
I did, that's why where it was. I memorized every
Authorized
page.
persons,
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, page 4 of 5, number 8, authorized persons. Does it spell out who that is? I mean, is that the,
So
Mr. Grasky is?
the trust agreement provides the authority for the first selectman to just identify those individuals. So I believe that it would be myself, Ron, Heidi. Was there a fourth? I think. Do you remember, Ron? It was going to be similar to like we would have in any other account in the town, like we have other accounts. It's similar to a.
I believe it was you, but you could delegate it to.
Right, right.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
So, all in favor of this motion by three? Raise your hand, passes 6-0. Lastly, call for public hearing for the Neighborhood Assistance Aid Program Application 2018. Mr. Capello may explain it, but I will call for the public hearing on June 11th at 7:30 PM, right here in the Town Council chambers. Mr. Keller, did you want to explain anything?
Sure. You'll probably recall that I brought up the Neighborhood Assistance Act program at a prior meeting. We've been collecting applications for various nonprofits and town programs. Part of the required process before the town can submit those to the State Department of Revenue Services for approval is to have a public hearing. And subsequent to the public hearing, the legislative body needs to vote to approve those projects. So my request was that you schedule this public hearing, and that in your next meeting you would have an agenda item to approve those projects so we could send them to the state by the end of June.
Okay. All in favor, do I have to get a vote on this?
I think as long as this council simply sets a date for a public hearing, I think that's sufficient.
So
Well,
you have the
obviously,
date.
we will notice it as a separate public hearing at 7:30 on
June 11th. Okay, going on to public participation.
We have
Anybody
to
wish?
vote on that?
No, he said we didn't have to. Anybody wish to publicly participate? Seeing nobody, can I have a vote for adjournment?
So moved.
So moved by Jason, a second? Second by Sean O'Rourke. Okay, we're adjourning until June 11th. Thank you very much.